A car horn blared, tires screeched, and a man in a $5,000 suit stumbled into the middle of the street, barely avoiding the rush of traffic. Rain pelted down, soaking him to the bone, but he didn't move. His fists were clenched. His chest heaved. Ethan Caldwell, white, powerful, billionaire, looked like a man seconds from shattering. From the corner, a small figure darted across the flooded crosswalk. A barefoot black African girl, no more than 10, weaving between speeding cars as horns screamed around her. She stopped in front of him, breathing hard, clutching a ragged piece of bread to her chest. She studied his face for a moment, then stepped closer. "Sir, are you hungry too?" The chaos of the city faded to silence. Two strangers, worlds apart, frozen in a moment that would change them both forever. What happened next, no one on that street would ever forget. Ethan Caldwell had built an empire from nothing. The son of a small-town mechanic, he clawed his way into the world of finance, turning a single investment app into a billion-dollar empire. Now, his name was printed on Forbes covers, his face plastered on magazine racks in airport lounges. People saw the wealth, the suits, the private jets. What they didn't see was the man who hadn't smiled in over a year. Chicago's downtown streets had always been his kingdom, a place where deals were sealed over champagne and fortunes shifted in a single phone call. But on that stormy Tuesday night, Ethan wasn't there for business. He was running from something money couldn't fix. The rain didn't bother him. Neither did the stares from passers-by wondering why one of the city's most powerful men was walking alone without an umbrella. He welcomed the cold. He wanted it to numb him. But the city had a way of forcing collisions, worlds crashing together in ways no one expects. That night, in the glow of flickering traffic lights, another life was moving toward him. Barefoot. Hungry. Unnoticed by everyone, except fate. In less than a minute, the richest man in the city and the poorest child in its streets would stand face to face. And neither would ever be the same again. The girl's voice hung in the air, trembling but clear. "Sir, are you hungry too?" Ethan blinked, trying to process her words through the storm in his mind. She couldn't have known. No one could have known. But something in her gaze, sharp, searching, made him feel as if she saw everything. Her name, she said, was Amina. 10 years old. Born in Nigeria. She'd been in Chicago for less than a year. Her mother had promised her a new life here, but that promise had dissolved the day her mother's visa expired and she vanished from Amina's life. Now, the girl lived with a distant cousin who saw her more as free labor than family. Most days, she was on the streets, collecting cans or asking strangers for change. Ethan noticed her bare feet, raw from the wet pavement. She shivered in the rain, but her grip on that piece of bread never loosened. She held it out again, as if his need could be greater than hers. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the downpour. "Hey! What are you doing with him?" Two uniformed security officers approached from the corner. They didn't look at Ethan, they looked at Amina. Their eyes narrowed, scanning her from head to toe like she was a threat. Ethan stepped forward, ready to speak, but one officer moved between them. "Sir, is this girl bothering you? We've had reports of aggressive panhandling." "Aggressive?" Ethan glanced at the tiny scrap of bread in her hand. She hadn't even asked him for money. "She's not bothering me," Ethan said firmly. "She was." "Sir," the second officer interrupted. "You don't have to cover for her. We'll escort her out of here." Amina's shoulders tensed. She didn't argue. She'd heard this tone before, too many times. Ethan could see it in her eyes. She knew exactly how this scene usually ended. But he wasn't going to let it. "She's with me," he said, his voice sharp. "She hasn't done anything wrong." The first officer gave him a look that landed somewhere between disbelief and irritation. "Sir, you may not understand, but these kids..." "These kids what?" Ethan shot back. "Live here? Exist? Get rained on while they're starving?" The pause between them was heavy. One officer sighed, muttering something about keeping the area clear, before they turned and walked away. Ethan turned to Amina, but she was already stepping back, ready to run. "Why are you leaving?" he asked. "Because they'll be back," she said simply. "They always come back." Her words pierced him deeper than the rain ever could. He wanted to ask 100 questions, where she slept, what she ate, who she trusted, but the answers felt too fragile for this cold street corner. Instead, he reached into his coat for his wallet. She shook her head. "I don't want your money. I just thought, maybe you were hungry too." Ethan froze. This wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was a child, offering the only thing she had to someone she thought was suffering like her. Before he could respond, a passing couple slowed to stare. The woman's eyes lingered on Amina with thinly veiled disgust, her hand clutching her purse tighter. "Can't believe they let them hang around here," she muttered to her companion, not caring that Ethan or Amina could hear. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd heard plenty of ugly words in boardrooms, but this, out in the open, aimed at a child, hit differently. Amina didn't react. She didn't need to. He could see it in the way her shoulders curled inward, as if she'd learned long ago that the safest response was silence. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted in Ethan. He'd spent his life fighting for every dollar, every deal, every inch of control. But this wasn't a fight over money or status. This was survival, and the cost of losing was everything. He didn't know it yet, but this chance meeting would pull him into a world he'd spent years ignoring. A world where power meant nothing, and skin color could decide the outcome of every interaction. And before the night was over, that truth would crash into him in a way he could never undo. The rain was letting up, but the night was far from quiet. A siren wailed somewhere nearby, bouncing off the tall glass walls of the financial district. Ethan and Amina walked side by side, either speaking, both carrying the weight of the encounter with the security guards. They were almost at the corner when it happened. A patrol car screeched to a stop in front of them, tires spitting water across the sidewalk. 2 police officers stepped out quickly, too quickly. Their hands were already near their belts. "You kid!" one officer barked, pointing at Amina. "Step away from him!" Amina froze, her body tensing like a trapped animal. Ethan instinctively stepped forward. "What's going on?" "Sir, please step back," the other officer said, his tone sharp. "We've had multiple reports of thefts in this area matching her description." Ethan's voice rose. "She's a child. She hasn't done anything." The first officer ignored him and started toward Amina. She clutched the piece of bread tighter, as if it were her last lifeline. "Empty your pockets," the officer ordered. "She doesn't have pockets," Ethan snapped. That was when the second officer's hand dropped fully to his holster. Not drawn, yet, but close enough to send a jolt of ice down Ethan's spine. A few people slowed to watch. One raised a phone, recording. The wet street reflected the flashing patrol lights, turning the moment into a surreal, almost cinematic nightmare. Amina's voice trembled. "I didn't steal anything." "Ma'am, step aside," the first officer said, already reaching for her arm. Something in Ethan broke. All the boardroom battles, the corporate negotiations, the carefully controlled image, none of it mattered. Not here. Not now. This was about stopping something that had been happening to kids like her long before he showed up in her life. "You're making a mistake," Ethan said, his voice hard. The first officer glanced at him, almost smirking. "Sir, do you know her? Or are you her next target?" The implication landed like a punch. Ethan stepped between them, the rain-soaked sidewalk slick beneath his feet. "If you touch her, you go through me." The air thickened. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. A man in a hoodie shouted, "She's just a kid." Another voice yelled, "This is what they do." The second officer's jaw tightened. "Sir, you're interfering with an investigation." "What investigation?" Ethan shot back. "She was walking with me. That's the whole story." A tense silence stretched. The rain had stopped, but droplets still slid from Ethan's hair onto his face, mingling with sweat. Amina stood motionless, eyes wide, as if waiting for the moment everything would go wrong. The first officer took a slow step closer, lowering his voice, but loud enough for Ethan to hear. "You think your money protects you here? It doesn't. Not from us." The words hit like a cold slap. Ethan realized, with a sick twist in his gut, that this wasn't just about Amina. They were daring him. Testing how far a man like him would go when it wasn't his life on the line. And then, the second officer reached again for Amina's arm. The crowd surged forward, voices rising. Phones pointed directly at the officers now, recording every move. The tension was seconds from snapping. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos, steady, deliberate. "You're on camera. Every word. Every step. You lay one finger on her, and the whole city will see what you do to a hungry child on a rainy night." The officer's hand froze midair. The first one glanced at the growing crowd, at the phones, at the red light blinking on the nearest lens. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the slow drip of water from the rooftops. Finally, the officers stepped back. "Stay out of trouble," the first one muttered to Amina, though his eyes stayed locked on Ethan. The patrol car pulled away, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping, but the look on Amina's face told him this was far from over. This was just one night in a lifetime of nights like this. And for the first time in years, Ethan knew exactly what he had to do next. The flashing lights faded into the distance, but the echo of that moment stayed in the air like smoke after a fire. Amina stood in silence, her small hands clenched at her sides. She didn't thank him, she didn't smile. She just stared at the ground, as if she already knew this wasn't the last time she'd be treated like a suspect for simply existing. Ethan wanted to tell her it was over, that she was safe now. But the truth lodged in his throat. Tonight had been a victory in the smallest sense. No arrests, no headlines, but it didn't erase the danger that followed her like a shadow. They walked together until the streets turned quieter, away from the glare of the skyscrapers. Ethan stopped at a corner store, bought her a pair of shoes, a jacket, and a bag of food. She accepted them with a nod, but he could see it in her eyes. She'd learned long ago not to depend on anything that could be taken away. When they reached the rundown building she called home, she hesitated at the door. "They'll be mad if they see you here," she said softly. "They don't like white people coming around." The irony hit him hard. In the same city, on the same night, she'd been targeted for being black and poor, and he would be unwelcome here for being white and rich. Ethan looked at her, rain still dripping from his coat. "I'll be back," he said. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture eased. She slipped inside, the door closing with a hollow thud. For a long time, Ethan stood there, staring at the building. Somewhere deep inside, he knew his life had shifted. In the days that followed, he couldn't shake her voice from his head. "Are you hungry too?" It was more than a question, it was a mirror, reflecting the emptiness he'd been carrying for years. He started making calls, not to lawyers or investors, but to community organizers, shelters, and advocacy groups. He listened to stories just like Amina's, and stories far worse. Children handcuffed for selling candy. Mothers arrested for asking why their sons were being searched. Whole neighborhoods treated like crime scenes because of the color of their skin. Ethan had spent his career building walls, around his company, his image, his heart. But once you've seen what's on the other side, you can't unsee it. He began funding safe spaces for at-risk youth in Chicago, hiring legal teams to represent families who couldn't afford it, and working with grassroots organizations to challenge the kind of profiling he'd witnessed that night. Still, the question haunted him, what if he hadn't been there? What if no one had been filming? Because for every story that makes it into the light, there are hundreds that vanish in the dark. And maybe that's the part we never talk about enough, the fact that survival in moments like these often comes down to chance. Who's watching? Who's recording? Who's willing to step forward? That night on the wet streets of Chicago, a barefoot girl offered her last piece of bread to a man she thought was hungry. She didn't know she was feeding something far deeper, a hunger for truth, for justice, for change. Ethan's wealth hadn't saved her. His name hadn't shielded her. What saved her, just barely, was the presence of witnesses and the courage to stand between her and the people who saw her as a problem to remove. But here's the truth we all need to face. Amina's story isn't rare. It's not unique. It's the daily reality for countless children across America and beyond. And if that doesn't shake us, then maybe the question we should be asking ourselves isn't, "Are you hungry too?" but, "Are we hungry enough for change to finally make it happen?" Because the rain will fall again. The streets will flood again. And somewhere, another child will stand in the cold, facing a system that's already decided who they are before they've even spoken. The only question is, will someone be there to stand with them?